You know, Frank, what do we need to do now to create thriving organizations?
Well, this is an age of disruption. And the reality is, the world periodically goes through these times. There's a very interesting book, The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe. I've read it a few times. Came out in the 90s, but it predicts based on historical patterns where we are now. And you can look back in history. There was a period in England in 1600s, I think it was called the Glorious Revolution. Then, 80 years later, we get to the American Revolution. Starts in 1783. 80 years later, we're at the Civil War and the whole Reconstruction, that whole period. And you take 1860, and pretty soon you're in the 1930s. And now, 80 years later brings us into the 2020s. And so this is a repeating pattern. And I think companies need to have very, very resilient cultures. They need to have cultures where people are engaged. They need to have trust-based cultures where leaders can get in front of them, tell them what's happening with complete openness and transparency. They need to be able to communicate and rally people, use organizational energy as a tool to overcome these hurdles and humps that come along in these periods. Because this is going to be about who survives and comes out the other side. And it's manifesting itself, this age of disruption, in so many things. New ways of working, political systems under attack, financial systems, you name it, kind of a global realignment going on. So expect the unexpected. That's what I say.
Yeah, I'd love to build on Frank's thought there. When we start to look at these fourth turnings, we also have to appreciate that we've only really been a socially connected world for the past 20 plus years or so. Right. And the internet, I would say, has been is not just causing one of the biggest disruptions in the human experience, but also accelerating the pace of change. So, as Frank mentioned, right, as we look at these kind of fourth turnings and seeing these cycles of change happening every century or so, those timelines are going to start to become a lot more condensed. So the types of changes we used to see that would happen over the course of centuries are now going to happen in decades. And what we saw happen in decades, we will now see in years, right? And companies have to recognize that they're going to be operating in a constant age of disruption, primarily because the pace of change is accelerating at such a rapid and exponential rate.
Jason, that sounds really scary. Always needing to change. So I'd imagine there are tons and tons of leaders out there that fear this disruption, but why embrace it?
Well, I would just say that we've always changed, right? I mean, we evolve, right? We are a species that is in a constant state of change. So we should not fear change, right? And contrary to popular belief, people don't fear change. They fear uncertainty, right? They fear uncertainty for what the future is. And some of the challenges that people are up against right now is that they have, to your point, right? We have all of these systems that are very vulnerable right now. And it's moved into the mainstream, that vulnerability. And people are starting to have serious concerns about what the future holds for them. And that happens at every scale of society, right? So whether that's through our national and global discourse or within our organizations, unless people understand like why we're changing, that the purpose of this change will actually yield better outcomes, and it's not just necessarily going to lead to a greater stress and more uncertainty. That's why leaders, it's really important for them to communicate the why behind any change initiatives and demonstrate and visualize the value for people for any new change initiative that's underway, and also making changes that are aligned to how we are evolving socially, right? And I think that's been the biggest challenge with technology to date, is that technological innovation is accelerating beyond the human capacity for being able to kind of keep up with those changes, which is why we're starting to see this big resistance against a lot of